In this lesson, we'll learn how to use the Move tool to select specific pixel data within our layered Photoshop files. All right, great. So this is the Lesson 9 Begin file. Feel free to open that up and follow along. So in the case of this particular file, I'm using a multi-layered document to basically isolate the different pieces of this digital illustration. So if we come over to our layer panel and kind of click on the eyeball next to them, you can see I have my tentacles on one layer here. I have a layer group, and inside that layer group contains all of the different layers for the package. So you can see here there's that fragile text, there's the up text, and kind of the two little graphics there next to it. And then of course we have the box. Now the white background is right over here on our background layers. So again, a multi-layered file. So again, this is not a huge file, but it is still multi-layered. Now when it comes to maybe selecting and moving around the specific contents of these layers, there's one tool that you really need to familiarize yourself with here inside of Photoshop. In fact, I would say this is probably the most important tool in the tool panel. It's right up here at the top. It's called the Move tool. It looks like a little kind of little arrow icon with kind of a quad arrow next to it, and it's kind of the default tool that I usually leave my cursor set to as I'm working here inside of Photoshop. So you can see an icon for my cursor that sort of matches that here. So what this tool does is exactly what the name implies. It lets us move things. So let me just come over here and select my tentacles layer, and you can see with that layer selected, I can tap anywhere on my canvas and I can drag those tentacles around and reposition them here. If I come over and I select maybe one of these layers inside the package group, I can come in and begin to kind of shift things around in there. Now, this particular document only has really 4 active layers in it, 4 layers that contain information that I would want to move around. So if you have a much bigger file, then locating exactly the information you want can become increasingly difficult. So there is a feature that's built into the Move tool that's actually pretty helpful. It's called Auto Select. And if we come up here to the control panel, you'll see a little box right here, and it says Auto Select next to it. Let's go ahead and turn that on here. And for the first example, I want to show you, let's go ahead and make sure this little drop down right here is set to Layer. All right, fantastic. So with layer selected, what this allows me to do is just simply use my cursor to, say, mouse over an area. Maybe I want to grab this tentacle right here. Well, if the area underneath my cursor contains that tentacle, then if it's the topmost layer, Photoshop's going to automatically switch to that layer and allow me to move the contents around. If I come over here and I mouse over the fragile layer here, you can see here that if I tap on that, it's going to switch automatically to our fragile layer. Even though the box layer is underneath it as well, Photoshop's looking at the topmost layer, underneath where I actually click my mouse cursor. So I can come over here and tap right there, and I can move the box around. Or I can come over here and tap, and I can move this graphic here around. All right, fantastic. So the layer mode for Auto Select allows us to automatically select any layer where we basically mouse over and click. So now, in the case of larger files, you may actually find the group option to be something very, very useful. So let me go ahead and switch over to group here. And I'm going to come over, and first I want to show you that we can actually come over here and tap on our tentacles, and we can still move that individual layer around, even though we are set to group. Now the difference here is, if I were to mouse over any of the layers that are in that package group, I could say maybe mouse over the word fragile right here, and if I tap there, the entire group is selected. And now what's happening, if I move that around, I'm moving all 3 of those layers inside that layer group. So you can see over here in my layer panel, the package group is selected. So if I were to come over here and tap there, again, it's looking at the topmost layer underneath the area I tap, so I can still move my tentacles layer around. But we can also begin to isolate groups. Again, this becomes a really useful option if you're working inside a larger Photoshop document that has multiple groups in it. Again, depending on how you set up the document. So with that said, We've looked at auto select and we've looked at how we can use that to select groups as well as layers, but I want to show you kind of another really useful tip for the move tool. Again, considering maybe a multi-layered document that's quite large, and maybe you're looking at a detail in the document, you can't really remember where that particular detail resides in your layer stack. Well, in the case of maybe this word fragile, what I'm going to do with my move tool is I'm simply going to right click on that area. And you can see what Photoshop has done is it's looked at the area right underneath my cursor when I right clicked, and it's telling me exactly what layers above this little perforated line exist underneath that area. And well, obviously all layers are going to exist, but which layers actually have pixel data on them? So it's telling me here that in the package group, you can see here how these two layers right here are indented. That tells me they're inside this layer group. So I have my fragile layer that has pixel data on it, as well as my box layer that has pixel data on it. Notice my tentacles layer is not listed there because that layer is transparent where I right-clicked. So, and obviously we have our background layer, which that entire background layer is filled with white. So feel free to maybe come over here and use that right click on a number of different areas. You can see if I right click on one of the tentacles, we have pixel data on the tentacles layer, as well as the box layer inside my package group. So again, this is just a really helpful little feature of the Move tool that I actually use quite a bit in the case of larger Photoshop files that I have many, many layers, and maybe I'm not really sure where that pixel data resides, and I need to make changes to it. All right, great. So in this lesson, we've learned about the Move tool and how we can use that here inside of Photoshop to select and move specific pixel data on layers inside our document. Now at this point, I want to go ahead and spend another lesson on the Move tool because really there are a number of other really useful things we can do with that. So we'll begin learning about those in the next lesson.